A writer in the 12th century refers to the Curragh as St. Brigids Pastures, in which no plough was suffered to turn a furrow. Legend tells us that St. Bridget asked the King of Leinster for land on which to build a monastery. The king scoffed at her request and said that he would grant her as much land as her cloak would cover. To the king's surprise, St. Bridget placed her cloak on the ground to cover the entire Curragh plain. The Curragh is probably the oldest and certainly the most extensive tract of semi-natural grassland in Ireland, and has existed as an unenclosed area of commonage for at least 2,000 years. In times past, it has been grazed by a variety of animals: cattle, pigs, and sheep. But the predominant animal was sheep. At one time, there could have been as many as 30,000 sheep on the Curragh. And then, in 1870, a law was introduced which restricted the rights to graze sheep to farmers whose lands adjoined the Curragh. This effectively reduced the number of sheep to about 6,000 today. In pre-Christian times, it was the site of the Éanach, a formal gathering of the people of the Kingdom of Leinster, a festival which lasted several days and had many functions: goods bartered, marriages solemnised, and all forms of contests engaged in. The open plains of the Curragh make it an ideal place for mustering armies and fighting battles. It has been witness to many historic battles and was the scene of a very tragic event during the 1798 rebellion, which became known as the Gibbet Rath Massacre. A general, arriving after the rebel camp had agreed peace terms, attacked the rebels and left 350 dead before being recalled. In 1804, the possibility of a French invasion saw an increase in the militia activities throughout Ireland, and a military camp was established on the Curragh. The next year, the Duke of Wellington made a visit to the camp on his way to Cork, en route to the Peninsular Wars. If 1815 is remembered as the year of Wellington's famous victory over the French at Waterloo, on the Curragh it marked the victory of Dan Donnelly over George Cooper, the English champion boxer. The fight took place in the month of December at the place that has since become known as Donnelly's Hollow. A great crowd attended, and a street ballad recalls the action in the 11th and final round. Donnelly rose up again, and meeting with great might, for to surprise the nobles all, continued at the fight. Cooper stood on his own defence, exertion proved in vain. He soon received a temple blow which stretched him on the plain. It was not until around the middle of the 19th century that physical structures were erected in the Curragh military camp. Initially, timber huts were mainly constructed for barrack accommodation. The present red-bricked camp started to appear on the skyline of the plains around 1894, and the development continued into the new century. The Curragh remained a training camp for the British Army until Irish independence in 1922, when it was handed over to the Army of the Irish Free State. Today, it continues to have a pivotal role as the Defence Forces Training Centre and is the largest military base in the state. The furze bushes are a common feature on the Curragh. In the past, the furze also provided shelter for a group of women who created nest-like shelters among them. to be near the military camp, and they became known as the Wrens. One of these wrens, called Nellie Clifton, became well known to the Crown and Queen Victoria. The young Prince of Wales, Edward, was sent to the Curragh camp in 1861 to spend time with the Grenadier Guards under the strictest discipline. However, there was much jocular talk amongst his fellow officers about his sheltered upbringing, so it was inevitable that someone would suggest calling in one of the Curragh wrens. The prince was evidently much taken by Nellie Clifton, but the news of this most disreputable liaison quickly reached the palace and his papa. So, Edward was shipped out to Germany, where he was introduced to his future wife, Princess Alexandra of Denmark. The plains of the Curragh are perfectly designed by time and nature for one of the most wonderful sights in nature, the running horse. It is commonly believed that the Irish folk hero, Finn McCool, and his warriors, Na Fianna, raced their horses from their den on the Hill of Allen across these plains, and thus began the tradition of horse racing on the Curragh. At the start of the 1700s, the Dublin gentry began to gather there for the sport of hunting with hounds and to challenge each other to match racing. One of these gentlemen, Thomas Connolly of Castletown House, purchased the lease on a house in Kildare town for the purposes of organising all match racing activities. This coffee house became known as the meeting place for the Curragh Jockey Club, which later evolved into the Irish Turf Club. The racing patrons established lodges around the Curragh for their private trainers and grooms, and soon bloodstock breeding activities began. These activities led to the celebrated colt called Birdcatcher, who became one of the most brilliant on the Curragh, and whose descendants have made him one of the greatest Irish sires, establishing the foundation for the continued success of Irish horse breeding and the national stud. Over the years, numerous training stables have developed on the fringes of the Curragh, and it is now recognised as a world-class training facility. It boasts 70 miles of immaculately maintained grass gallops, 12 miles of peat gallops, and 8 all-weather tracks. One of the most famous gallops is the Testing Old Vic, funded by Sheikh Mohammed, following the victory of his horse of the same name in the Irish Derby in 1989. It climbs all the way up to the summit of Walsh's Hill, providing a stern stamina test over 9 furlongs. The Curragh has long been defined as the home of horse racing in Ireland, with its sandy soil and natural drainage, which is perfect for racing. It has become famous worldwide for its 5 classic horse racing events, including the Irish Derby, attracting top-class horses and visitors from all over the world. The Irish Derby was first staged in 1866 and is now the key event in the Irish summer racing and social calendar, attracting the casual racegoer as well as the regular punter. There is nothing like race day to bring out the style. The course webpage advises the ladies to dress for the occasion and the weather, and not for a wedding or the nightclub. Don't have your skirt too short, heels you can't walk in, and too much flesh on display. Leave a little to the imagination. Besides the racing, the parade ring is the centre of activity, providing the punter with a close-up view of the horse, the trainer and the jockey. A final chance to assess the odds before heading to the tote or the bookies ring to place that all-important bet. Although the sense of openness on the Curragh has been somewhat diminished by the development of the military camp, the racecourse and the motorway, it still remains an extensive open landscape and a place for the soldier, the hunter and the punter to enjoy.